Talofa lava, this is Pacific Waves from RNZ Pacific. I'm Susanna Suisuiki. Coming up, recovery efforts continue in Vanuatu. Also,
I've seen a lot of people moving to the US even before we closed. Half the staff is now in Las Vegas.
North Pacific Islands struggle to bring in tourists, and
You know, I love that Polyfest is so inclusive, and I love experiencing and learning about the other cultures.
Polyfest gears up for its big anniversary in April. A New Zealand Pasifika health team has finished a medical response mission in Vanuatu. For 3 weeks, the PACMAT team provided medical and mental wellbeing services to over 500 individuals in the wake of December's deadly earthquake. I caught up with the Pasifika Medical Association's chief executive, Dr. Debbie Sorensen.
They actually did lots of work. So they saw more than 500 people in 3 weeks. They also ran a number of groups for adults and children to equip them with tools to deal with anxiety and, learning how to breathe properly and talking to people about, how normal it is to feel worried after being caught in such an event. And so with those groups, there were lots of groups. They also worked with the first responders. For example, the group of people that were involved in digging out the 9 people in the Billabong building that had collapsed, and also a number of other first responders around the town. So they worked not only in Vila, but also in the outer clinics around Efate. So really quite a lot of work and varied work in different places.
Do you think 3 weeks was long enough, or is that usually the time frame that you're given when it comes to post-disaster recovery and rebuild?
Yes, it depends a little on the disaster, but certainly with Vanuatu, that 3-week deployment was a good amount of time. In fact, we are doing some more work in Vanuatu, but it's under a different program, and we're doing some work to help them design and plan the development of their mental health services moving forward. And also we've been asked to work with a lot of public servants as well so that they can access psychosocial mental health support. So I think the nature of the work changes after the immediate response. So you do response and then recovery, and now we've moved into the recovery phase, which is why the planning for the mental health services is important and ongoing support for public servants.
Just based on the release, it stated that the medical mission was a success. How do you determine if that was successful? Is it based on the number of people that were treated, or do you take into consideration the quality of the care that was provided?
That's a fantastic question, Susanna. So it's a number of things. We surveyed patients that the team saw, and asked them to rate how they were when they first came, before they saw someone, and how they felt after that. And that included the group work, how they felt before they did the group work, and how they felt after that. And so that's quite a scientific way of measuring the impact for people, is to say to them, were you better? After you saw these people, did it make a difference to you? Because that's the first measure. The second measure certainly is around the number of people seen. So, with a team of 9, clinical team of 9, you certainly want to make sure that people are busy all the time. And so it was clear that there was lots of demand and lots of need. The other measure that we used are things like grandparents bringing in young people or grandchildren that are under their care that they were concerned about. And what that demonstrates is that the community have a high trust in the team because they will bring their most vulnerable, people to the team to be seen. So there's a number of measures as we go through. We also collect quite a lot of data. So we, when we see people, they do a kind of scoring tool called the Kessler scale. And that tells us just how severe their anxiety, depression, other symptoms might be. And so we're able to then see that we are actually intervening with people who have mild to moderate anxiety and depression, and sometimes something more serious.
Just on that subject, in terms of mental health well-being and anxiety, are there any further follow-ups or checkups with those people, or is that now the responsibility of Vanuatu's health ministry?
Vanuatu have a really good mental health team, and it's a community-based team called Mind Care, and it works very closely with Dr. Jimmy Obed, who's a psychiatrist in Vanuatu, and his team. So part of our job is to support Dr. Obed, but secondly, once you've made a connection with people, you can actually follow them up remotely like this, virtually. And so it's so much easier. So you don't have to necessarily be there to do it. And so we have offered that service to people, that our clinicians can get on a Zoom or WhatsApp or whatever people use and talk to them and provide additional support if they need that.
And lastly, Debbie, just to round up our talanoa, how's everyone in the PACMAT team doing? This medical mission would have taken a toll on them too. Do they take time to unwind? Talk me through that.
Yes, again, really good question. So a 3-week mission requires them to stand down from work for 5 working days. So they've been off in the past week. They came back from Vanuatu very tired. And it's tiring because they're doing lots of work over long days, and they're working, mostly 6 days a week, sometimes 7. They're working in heat, and they're working, in remote areas where, you have to really make sure that you are drinking enough fluid. You need to keep eating those sorts of things. So by the time they kind of came to leaving Vanuatu, they were pretty tired and worn out. And so it's really important that they have time to rest and recharge, so that when they go back to their clinical services, who've been good enough to release them for us, they're actually able to function really well, and they're not tired and kind of worn out. So that is the process. Everyone has to stand down for that amount of time.
Tonga's Prime Minister is expected to announce his cabinet this week after the initial date was deferred with no explanation. Our Tonga correspondent, Kalafi Moala, says disagreement between King Tupou VI and Tonga's new Prime Minister could be behind the delay in forming a new cabinet. Mr. Moala says the King and the Privy Council have to approve each individual appointment. He told Margot Staunton that people are growing tired of not knowing what's going on.
The reason for the delay, obviously, there's only one reason, is that whoever the Prime Minister have appointed, or the list of appointees, still the King and his Privy Council are still going through that. In other words, they have not yet come to an agreement or a conclusion of who should be in the cabinet. That's the only reason there's a delay. It's time that people wake up to the point that the King's involvement in this is so significant. For better or for worse, it's his involvement in the appointment of the cabinet ministers that's really delaying. I mean, previously it was just a matter of formality. A list is submitted to the King, he goes over that list, unless there is an objection for the appointment of something so obviously not suitable. Usually it's just a matter of formality, it's approved and it's announced. This is the first time since the reform in 2010 that there has been this long delay. And it's interesting, the delay is happening to a prime minister and a government that's going to be only in government for 9 months, and it's also an election year. And I give an example. They're going to be in government and be operating under the current budget, which finishes on June 30th. So in that regard, they'll have to come up with a new budget from July, and will be in operation on that budget from July until October, and Parliament will be in in recess for the next election. It's a very, very odd situation. And I'm hoping that this Prime Minister and the new appointed government will be hoping that come November, they'll be elected and they'll be back and continue to govern. But to go through all of these delays for government, it's only going to be for 9 months. It's very, very strange.
So in terms of the recent delay in announcing cabinet, do you think that there's obviously some disagreement going on between the Prime Minister and the King over who should be appointed? Is there concern that perhaps the King's having too much say?
There is no other reason. The Prime Minister, not only traditionally since the reform, but also constitutionally, he has the right. He's elected by Parliament, and then he has the right to appoint his ministers, every single one of the cabinet ministers. So knowing Dr. Heke himself, he is the guy that will be quite diligent in doing that, appointing his ministers. And then, of course, these are submitted to the King for his final approval, which has been in the previous 4 governments, have been just a matter of formality. But this time, very, very obviously, there is exchanges going on that's happening between the Prime Minister and the Palace Office. Obviously, the process for approval of the appointees is taking time. And they don't announce this so that the public knows about this. This is a real issue. This is why we do have a very fragile democracy, because there is absolutely no transparency in all that's going on. There has not been any announcements of why the delays. The public have got that figured out.
I think there's a bit of a power struggle going on. Would Eke be keen to appoint people himself, appoint the people he thinks are fit?
Well, a chief change that happened in 2010 was that Parliament would elect the Prime Minister, and then the Prime Minister will appoint his cabinet. That was the key change. Prior to that, the King himself will appoint the Prime Minister. He also appoints all the ministers. He actually is the one that appoints the government. 2010, that was changed. And the King's role in the appointment was more a formality, just to provide a check and balance to make sure everything is fine. There has never been a delay in previous governments. This is the first time that this has happened. So obviously, being held up from the Palace Office, and obviously there may have been some disagreements on who was to be appointed. I'm not saying that that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's definitely the reason for the delay.
And how are the public reacting to this further delay?
Well, I think people are start waking up. Particularly since last week when they announced officially that the Prime Minister is now the Prime Minister and he's now at the Prime Minister's office operating as the Prime Minister over the old cabinet. And that's a very odd thing, to have a newly elected Prime Minister who is now the Prime Minister and operating with an old cabinet that he did not appoint because the new cabinet has still not been approved from the Palace Office.
The King formally appointed Prime Minister Aisake Eke last Wednesday. RNZ Pacific has made several requests to speak to the Prime Minister about the delays. Tourism in the North Pacific is still very far off from recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. The Northern Mariana Islands, Guam and Palau are only reaching about half the 2019 visitor numbers or significantly less. It's a contrast to the Cook Islands and Fiji, where tourism is doing better than ever. Caleb Fotheringham has more.
Several major businesses in the Northern Mariana Islands shut up shop last year due to dire economic conditions. RNZ Pacific's Northern Mariana Islands correspondent Mark Rabigo, who was the editor at newspaper Saipan Tribune, one of the businesses that was forced to close, says Las Vegas is becoming a mini Saipan as people leave for better economic prospects.
I've seen a lot of people moving to the U.S. Saipan Tribune alone, when we closed, even before we closed, half the staff is now in Las Vegas, which is quietly becoming a boom town there.
It's not getting any better. Local media reports the acting finance secretary is anticipating a substantial adverse effect on the government revenue collections from a sharp decline in tourist arrivals in 2025. It's from an expected withdrawal of more charter services from the biggest market, Korea, following the Jeju crash at Moan International Airport in December. Japan has traditionally been another strong market, but tourists are being put off by a weak yen.
We just can't live with just Korean tourists. We should be like the feet in the stool. We should have like 4 or 3 markets. Right now, Japan tourism is bad because The US dollar is just too strong.
According to the Marianas Visitors Authority, from January to November in 2024, there were 210,000 visitors, slightly up from the same period last year, which was 195,000, but far off from the 2019 number of 487,000. Mark Rabigo says although not yet official, it sounds like luxury mall DFS will be added to the list of businesses that have closed.
It's the only mall we have right now that's air-conditioned. It's a magnet for tourists, especially Chinese tourists who wants to buy luxury items, bags, watches, clothes, and they're just closing up shop, which is quite depressing if you ask me.
It's a similar story for Guam. Total visitor numbers from January to November in 2019 for the same period in 2024 has more than halved, from 1.5 million to now less than 700,000. Palau has gone from 94,000 in 2019 to 40,000 in 2024, without including December, which is yet to be counted. It's in contrast with Fiji, which has reached a new visitor record in 2024 of more than 980,000. Tourism Fiji Chief Executive Brent Hill says it's been an incredible year, with more than 6% growth year on year.
Very exciting and great for Fiji. I mean, what that means to our country can't be understated. And we got there through some really good numbers, particularly Kiwi numbers were up on last year, certainly Australia and US as well up on last year. So some really good, healthy signs and looking good into 25.
Mr. Hill says Australia and New Zealand remain the biggest markets, but US numbers have seen substantial growth, and more visitors are making the long trip from the UK and Europe.
We still have room to grow because when you look at China compared to 2019, we still haven't got to that 2019 level. So, there's still areas within our market mix where we think we can grow.
He says luxury resorts are reporting record numbers.
People are realising, yes, of course, you can travel to places like Hawaii and Maldives and so on that traditionally you might have known for luxury. But now with the dollar and so on, some of the incredible luxury properties that Fiji has are certainly, on the radar now, and we're seeing more people travel out there.
Tourism in the Cook Islands accounts for about 70% of the nation's revenue. Visitor arrivals last year were only 1,000 short of the pre-pandemic high set in 2019. Tourism Council President Teddy Carr says back then there was some pushback from locals who were unhappy with the growth. However, she says now more people are benefiting, with tourists opting to stay in smaller holiday homes, not just where the main hotels are.
More locals are actually benefiting from it, and that's a positive thing. So we're not seeing the same pushback this time. It seems like tourism has sort of absorbed itself into the various new accommodation areas around the island. So that's all positive for locals.
Looking ahead, she says the market will still be dominated by New Zealanders.
This year will mark the 50th anniversary of the ASB Polyfest, one of the largest Pacific festivals in the world. To prepare for the event taking place in April, the annual Student Leaders Conference was held at the Auckland Museum last week, attended by over 200 students from various schools across Aotearoa. Grace Fever was there and has more.
Kia ora, welcome to ASB Polyfest.
Smiles, laughter and cheers filled the air as students from across Aotearoa gathered during their school holidays, dressed in their uniforms to represent their schools. The two-day event brought together student leaders from head girls, head boys, prefects, mentors and cultural leaders, where they participated in workshops and group activities. St Mary's College in Ponsonby will make its return to Polyfest, marking 30 years since they last took the stage. Deputy Head Girl Claren Gray is excited to honour the school's legacy with performances from their Samoan group and Kapahaka, or Māori group.
Growing up in a westernised society, you get segregated from where you feel comfortable in. And I think being in an environment like this where Polyfest embraces and expresses your culture, it's just an honour to be here.
Sayuli Terry Leo Mau, the director for ASB Polyfest and an ex-St Mary student, says it's great to see Polyfest still valued in Ponsonby.
It's nice to see that there's still a the value of Polyfest in Ponsonby in particular.
While some think Polyfest is just for Pacific Islanders, a non-Pacific student from James Cook High School in Manurewa says the event is about bridging gaps and raising awareness.
As a white person, people look at me and go, what are you doing here today? And, to that I say, I love that Polyfest is so inclusive, and I love experiencing and learning about the other cultures within Polyfest.
The event will be scaled back due to limited funding for the 50th anniversary. Consequently, the Polyfest committee will monetise the live content and revert to traditional fundraising methods.
One of the things I didn't like is to have to monetise our live stream, but we have to. It's gold, the content that we have to offer, and we just want to make sure that we still run this festival at the quality and the energy that it deserves.
Many questions remain about the future of Polyfest. However, Sayuli says regardless of the funding being cut, it will continue.
Our people are resilient, and nothing's going to stop this festival from running. Even if we didn't get enough money to run it at our normal venue of the Manukau Sports Bowl, we probably would have even just returned it back to the schools where it originally started. So, no, it's going to happen with or without the funding, but we know there's people out there that see the value of it.
That's Pacific Waves for today. For all episodes, head over to rnz.co.nz/Pacific. We're also on Spotify, Apple and iHeartRadio. From myself and the RNZ Pacific team, tō whā soifua.